Okay, this is the second tape out of two tapes. This is December the 27th, 1997. We're interviewing Mom and Dad Ware, some of the history of the Ware family. Mom, we left off with tape one with the trip to New Orleans that you guys took after Dad got out of the service. You want to talk about that?
Yes, I was just telling when you closed up the other tape that Dad decided, since he wasn't feeling too well from the mumps, that we would go down in the sunshine for a while and he would get feeling better. And so Grandma and Grandpa Pullen were always game to go any place, and he had his own coal business, and he just took a week off, took Gerald out of kindergarten, and we went to New Orleans in the old Ford. And the first thing both of them did is they put a whole case of oil on the luggage rack on the back of the car, because the old Ford used a lot of oil. And I can let Dad talk about that later, but we had an outstanding nice trip with the Ford, except Grandma couldn't ride in the back seat, so we put her in front. She was like Hope is. She got car sick.
Oh.
And we kept her in front, and I rode in the back most of the way down, and Dad drove. So when we got down there, why, Uncle Roscoe only had a 3-room apartment. He had room for my folks, and so he got us a room at the Charity Hospital up on the highest floor, I think. I can't remember how high it was. And we had a hospital crib for David. He was 2, and Dad and I. And then every night he'd have to go down and get us through the ropes of the Charity Hospital so we could get in.
Mm-hmm.
He'd just usher us into the elevator, and then we'd go on up. Of course, we had no trouble coming out, but it was quite an experience. And we had a real good time with them. They showed us around New Orleans, and we drove both cars part of the time, and they showed us the Canal Street, and they showed us the Huey Long Bridge, and took us to our first tour of the orange groves. This is in the early spring. The oranges weren't, I don't think I remember any on the trees, but we did see the groves and see them, how neat they are, and planted in the different rows like an orchard, which later we've seen in a lot of it in Florida. And the Huey Long Bridge was quite an experience. That was built after one of the, Dad can tell me here if I'm wrong, wasn't he a senator?
Governor.
Governor of Louisiana. And they built this over a bunch of the bayou country so the cars could go through or go over it. And then we took a trip up on the Mississippi on a boat, and he showed us the French quarters, and we went down to the fish market, and I think we ate out in some of those places, but I don't remember anymore. That's been a good many years ago.
What year would that have been? Did you
It'd be spring of
46.
1946.
46. Mm-hmm. So you came back and you found a house. Where did you live? Where did you live after you got out of the service?
Lived in East Bluff, on East Fry.
On Fry.
We were
908
right close
and a half.
to the
The
Glen
house
Oak,
still stands.
Glen Oak Grade School. In fact, all of you children, every one, started and finished in the Glen Oak Grade School, within just a few blocks of where we lived. In fact, when we looked for houses, we tried to find a place where it was close to a good school, and that was a good school in those days.
And then the next house that you purchased was the first one you actually purchased, was
That was over
1007.
East Republic, that's right. We lived there actually for 25 years. And one thing about it was an outstanding neighborhood. When one of our neighbors that lived there a good number of years decided to move, they decided to have a going away party for them. So we had a picnic. And after they moved every year, all the time we lived there, we'd have a block picnic. And we'd usually either go over to Glen Oak, Bradley, or down at the foot of the
Mostly at the foot of Grandview Drive. Dad.
Grandview Drive,
It's
and
my
have our
favorite place.
neighborhood picnic.
I'd like to talk about some of the vacations that you've taken down through the years, maybe some of the earlier ones.
Well, that we might say was an early vacation. Some of our vacation time, we just either went down to Springfield State Fair. One, we went up to as far as Milwaukee, and that was before your time, Larry. And we toured, they went to Great America, I don't think that's the name of the
No,
amusement
that was
park.
in Chicago,
In
Dad.
Chicago. Well, they stopped there and went. They went up to Milwaukee and did sightseeing up there. And then as years
When
went
David was
by,
little.
a little later, the year that Dave and Susie got married, we rented a little 13-foot high-low trailer and toured around up through the state of Michigan, went up to as far as Sault Ste. Marie and rode the locks and did saw several points of interest, and then came back on the side of Wisconsin, went through the Dales, and had a great time. That was the first experience with a trailer.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next year, we rented a 15-foot Shasta, and that was the first year that Dave and Susan were living in Colorado when he was going to the school in Boulder, Colorado University. And we went up to a campground in Roosevelt National Forest, just south of Rocky Mountain National Park, camped at about 10,500 feet, and at Brainerd Lake, I think they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent several days up there just hiking and sightseeing. That was one of the and we spent over 4th of July. In fact, when we first got there, it was the last of June, and there was ice and snow over a lot of the picnic tables. But by the 4th of July had rolled around, most of that snow had melted. And Dave and Susie come up and spent the 4th with us and one other day, and really had a nice time up there. It was one of the places where I kind of got the fever to go fishing, but I had some fishing tackle because in those mountain lakes that the ice had scooped out, the little glaciers, they were just thick with speckled trout.
Rainbow trout too, Dad.
And
Rainbow
Yeah,
one day, one time when David come up, one of his friends supplied with a bunch of trout, and we cooked them over
That was the same year, Dad,
charcoal,
Jim.
and it was just delicious.
Wasn't that 67?
67.
Yeah.
67.
You and Don never ate fish, and Susie put it in aluminum foil with vegetables around it and fixed it over the campfire, and you really ate it.
Yeah, I wasn't
Loved
real
it.
excited about it, but after I got a taste of it, I've
Yeah.
liked
Oh,
it
it
ever
was-
since.
Right.
It's just real white meat and so just delightfully fresh. In fact, we went through a fish hatchery the time we were out there and watched them raising the fish. And they'd keep them in until they was, I suppose, just about a year old, and then they'd put them out in the different lakes to stock the fish. Cause a lot of people went fishing out there when they went on vacation.
One of the first things I remember about us going around Lake Michigan the year with a rented trailer is we were pretty well cramped with 5 people, as we had you and Kathy and Don.
Mm-hmm.
David had stayed home. Of course, he was married by then anyway. And Dad was going to make his usual morning pancakes. And he neglected to put up the awning the night before over the front of the trailer. And he started the pancakes and fixing them, and it started to rain. And he stood out there in the rain with his raincoat on and fried the pancakes. And you kids got quite a laugh out of that. We were at one of the lakes.
I think the first vacation that I can remember where we traveled at all, and as a whole family, the only vacation we took as a whole family was in the 1959 Ford to
Ooh,
Colorado.
That was the
That was in
cabins. We had the cabin that
1963, the
Mhm.
same year that my dad passed away. Now, we rented a cottage, I believe they called it Highview
It was
Cottage,
Highview, yeah.
just west of Estes Park.
Right.
And that was the first time we had really camped out stayed any length of time out in near the Rocky Mountain National Park. And we did a lot of touring. In fact, that was a time that David and some acquaintances he made while he was out there climbed Long's Peak.
Mhm.
Your dad lost the rest of his hair.
I was concerned because I had read a story about ones that went hiking up in the mountains out in the state of Washington and got into a bad electrical storm. And they can, by the afternoon comes around in the summertime, they can generate a pretty good storm. And it was storming up in the mountains, but so it was lucky they were above the storm. They was actually above the clouds, so they didn't get in the storm.
Okay, there, let me.
Larry, that we went ghost town hunting.
Oh yes, Ward City.
Yeah, we were at the little town of Ward, which was a ghost town.
Oh,
It
we had
was
both
been
of
an
them down with
old
us.
gold mining town. We got interested in going around to different ghost towns.
Mm-hmm.
Golden was another, and one Sunday morning we decided to do a little touring, and we went down through the town of Ward and went down what was used to be an old railroad right away, and we drove on that right away. They'd taken the tracks out, of course, and it was just wide enough for a car, and about every mile or two there'd be a turnout, and where if you met a vehicle, well, you'd have to turn out and then they could get by. And it was beautiful scenery. And Helen said, "What are you going to do if you meet a car?" I said, "I'll figure that out after I meet them." But after the gold, after they get the gold mined out, they would just leave everything just as they might be there. A lot of their equipment, and everything would just be left there. In fact, if you remember, Dave took us on a Jeep one time. We was out there and went up some ghost town to Caribou.
Pennsylvania Gulch Trail, I think it was.
Was
called.
that what it was?
Yes.
And it was just wide as just a track wide enough for a 4-wheel drive vehicle. We went down through water streams and I don't know what all it was. But they had made a movie at Caribou, Stagecoach, years prior to that. And that was this place where they made the Stagecoach movie.
And I think that some of my fondest memories were all the vacations that we took, and we took such a variety of them.
Yes.
We went to Yellowstone National Park,
Yep.
Grand Teton, out east to see some of the Tills, out
That
to
was-
Rochester. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that was 1970 when we went with Uncle Robert and Aunt Florence. They started
yes.
with us.
Now, Robert and Florence had a trailer, and we planned a trip to go east to see our relatives on the Till side in Rochester, New York. And our first stop was near Detroit. And we went through the
Dearborn.
Greenfield Village and the Ford Museum. Spent one day going through that, and Robert and Florence had to leave us. In fact, we camped right along a state police place, right along the New York Central Railroad. And we was very well entertained the very first night. We got used to the trains going by. But Florence got sick and had to come back to Peoria. And we went on from, after spending 2 days at the Greenfield Village and the Ford Museum, we went on across Ontario and went stop at Toronto and spent a day sightseeing there. Then we went to the Niagara Falls, saw that. And then from there we went to Rochester and spent with my mother's 3 brothers and sister. And I had a real nice time visiting.
Could you give their names?
Oh, sure. Mother had one sister, Aunt Margaret. She never married, but she was one of our favorite aunts because she was so loving and kind to all of us kids. She just a little like Mother Pullen. She just loved children. Mm-hmm. And then there was the oldest one was Uncle James Till, and then Uncle David, and then Uncle Robert was the younger one. All 3 of them were carpenters. Uncle David was a contractor and did contracts for building real nice homes mostly. And I had a number of cousins. I had Winston and Bruce, which were Uncle David and Hannah's children, and Uncle Robert had 2 boys and a girl. Would be Raymond, Lucille, and I can't think of the boy's name right now. Arnold. And we got to see them on the average about once a year because they would come out to see us in the summer on the farm, or we'd go out to see them. Mm-hmm. As I was growing up, so that's when we liked to go out and see them.
One funny thing about that family is they were out to the farm. Your dad told me this. I wasn't there. Out to the farm one summer when which one of the kids wanted to know if the cow gave chocolate milk? Was that
Lucille? Well, in fact, Lucille came out with Aunt Margaret one time. Aunt Margaret came out in a train. She'd always ride the train out. She brought Lucille. She wasn't very old. She was probably not more than about 5 years old, and she'd never been out to see the milk, the cows and everything. She thought the milk was coming in a bottle. So we milked the cows, and we'd put the milk, of course, in a cooler box we put down the well. Lucille looked at that milk and says, "That come from the cows?" And she wouldn't drink any more milk because the milk she drank came in bottles.
She
Didn't
also
come in a
asked about the
pitcher
chocolate milk.
out of the cows.
The next thing I have here is when did we get our first television set?
We bought our first television set in the winter of 1951. Bought a little 14-inch Motorola, and our nearest TV station was the Quad Cities, would be Rock Island, Davenport. We had a choice of two stations, WHBF Channel 4 or WOC Channel 5. And even so, it wasn't really dependable because they were about 65 airline miles from Peoria. And unless the temperature was just right, had temperature inversion, you didn't get a very good picture. Well, I put an antenna up on top of the house. I was probably about 50 feet above ground level, and with a booster I could get them, and once in a while I could get a Chicago station in St. Louis. But we didn't get good TV until 1953 when we had a Peoria station, which was WEK.
It came on as channel 43. I
43,
believe.
that's correct, originally.
What did you pay for your television, and also what did you pay for your antenna that you had
Well,
to put up?
the antenna and the booster and everything cost as much as the TV roughly, and I paid $225, I believe it was, for the TV. But it was a good little TV. It had after we got local TV, it had a good picture on it. But you had to have when Peoria came on, it had UHF, didn't have the VHF. We had to run it through a converter, so it would tune that higher frequency.
The television that I remember was, I believe it was a 21-inch Magnavox.
That's correct.
TV, kind of
Yeah.
a box that set up on a turntable. What year did you buy that one?
Ooh, you got me there. I think probably about 57 or 58. It was actually a used one I bought.
Mhm.
Bought it from Bell Nelson.
Didn't you have to put a new picture tube in it right away?
Yeah, we played it and played it and played it. It wouldn't die.
No, we had it until 1980.
Yeah,
That's when we
yeah.
finally gave it away.
Your little sister, older sister would be to you, was still alive at that time, and when we first got TV, and she'd watch the
Kukla friend.
Kukla and Ollie on the TV, and then she turned around and she'd go around to the back to see where they were coming from.
You're talking about Mary Helen.
Yes, I am.
Mary Helen.
Uh-huh.
That's right, their
And,
second child.
Dad used to get quite a buzz out of her trying to
They were
figure
little
it out.
puppets. All they showed was just their head, you know. They would just put them on their hand and talk
She
with
loved
them.
it.
And she would get herself up on a chair and look down to see if she could see the rest of them, because all they were showing was just from their about their neck up. She thought they ought to be the rest of them. She couldn't figure out why.
What kind of programs were on?
Well, there were a lot of good programs. They had Arthur Godfrey had two different programs. He had a talent show and then he had a variety show. And there was, I wish I could bring it to mind, but they had a lot of dramatic, which we liked. A lot of the dramas would have on there. And they had, of course, a lot of Gene Autry and all the Western shows.
Oh, they had
all those,
Wagon Train was one.
yeah.
You and Don used to watch that.
Mm-hmm.
They had another show by you had him on the other night. He's dead now. That talent show used to come on, interview and try out their
On
different.
CBS.
Ed Sullivan?
Ed
Sullivan
Sullivan
show. Yeah,
and
that
Ted
was on
Max was another one. There was two shows.
The
on
Ted
there,
wasn't it
so-
Ted Max Amateur Hour? It was
believe
on.
it was,
Ed
yeah.
Sullivan was on, I believe, on Sunday nights.
Yeah.
That's
Was
right.
that right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
then
of
we
course,
had
Jack Benny, and then what were there? So many different variety shows.
There was the fellow from Peoria that was on there that I named on the first radio show.
Bob Hope.
Yeah,
Bob
Bob
Hope
Hope
had
was
a show.
on.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of. They were really better television in those days than we have today,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I'm concerned.
Did you have any favorite weekly series like Leave It to Beaver and Lassie? I remember we watched Lassie, Wonderful World of Disney.
Had some Walt Disney shows,
We
which were
had
very good.
Another one that Dad and I liked real well was the top 10 songs of the week, and
Oh,
they
really?
would act them out and sing them.
Lucky
That was
Strike.
always on Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had another fellow that used to put movies on that he'd run his cars through the studio. He was a car salesman here in Peoria, and he'd show the different cars as that'd be advertising
Mm-hmm.
that he had for sale.
Mm-hmm.
Bring 'em on through, bud. Bring 'em on through. That's what he used to say.
What the why bring one through that wouldn't get started? They'd have to
They'd
push,
have to
push
push
it
it
off the hand.
Probably didn't sell very good.
I don't
No.
know. Do you remember his name? It wasn't Bierce, but it was
No,
Beard. Was it Beard?
Paul Beard.
Paul Beard.
Paul Beard.
Paul
He
Beard.
was quite
yeah.
a laugh. Get quite a laugh.
He
out
would
of that.
sponsor the show, and that was his commercial. He'd show the.
Oh yes, I know. We had a couple of Mom Ware, like Grandma to you, was the one of Liberace on the piano.
Oh yeah.
He had his candles up on the piano, and that was another weekly show that was on every Saturday night.
And of course, you guys watched Lawrence Welk.
Oh yeah, we had Lawrence
Lawrence
Welk's
Welk
been on
been
for
on.
years.
I
We're
guess the
still watching.
longest running orchestra that ever was on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Played the older time music, which we enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all the special holidays would have on New York City, and because television started in the East, if I remember right,
Mm-hmm.
we had
New
television
York City.
before the war years or during the war years back east. We didn't have it,
Mhm.
but they did then.
In 1966, you got your first color television set.
That's right. We wasn't the first one to have. Robert had one ahead of us quite a while.
Mm-hmm. He had
course.
one a couple of years ahead, I believe, and then Uncle Gerald bought one, and then you
Right.
bought one. Yeah.
And later we got one for Grandma Pullen, I think somebody did. My mother used to enjoy the colored TV. She'd come over and watch you kids while we'd go away once in a while in the evening, and you went to bed early and she watched the TV, and she thoroughly enjoyed that color.
Oh yeah. Well, I did too. 1966 was a year that a lot of events happened. Your parents were killed in a car accident.
That's right.
David got married.
That's right.
Several of the cousins got married that
In
year.
the early year of 1966 was about April. I think Carol Jean and Ed Osberger were the first married, and they were married in our church,
Mm-hmm.
which was Bradley Methodist then at that time. And then David graduated from college that year too, from Wabash,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a decision to make about law school, and that's when Wabash loaned $800 to David to start to law school. This is amazing because it kind of has gone back the way Roscoe got started, and later on, then David paid them back. So he, with that 800 and what Susie could make and what the rest of us could give him, which wasn't very much, he started college. So that was another one. Plus, they were married that in August the 27th, which was 2 days before your dad and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary that year.
Mm-hmm.
And then my folks got killed in October. Also, I started to work for the Shire Dairies that fall.
Talk a little bit about working at Shires. What it was like going back to work after how many years was it?
It was really, I didn't want to go. I was happy at home. I had 25 years of being a housewife. I was one woman that did not want a career. I didn't care. But Dad was needing some help on his health was failing, and to try to work 2 jobs, which he'd done for a good many years. So he said, I don't care what you do, just bring in some money. Get out, and if it's only $12 a week. And I thought, gee, that ought not be hard to do. And Frida was just starting to get acquainted with her. She was a manager of the Prospect Dairy right close there where we got our milk. And I had been for maybe 2 years been going in and getting the milk because I had a car, because David had to have a car. So the car, he and I shared it. He drove it by night, I drove it by day.
Which one was that?
That was that Ford 2-door, I think it was, or whatever we owned.
The 63 Ford? Or did we
I
have
think
that?
it was, wasn't it, Dad? It was just a coupe. It might have been 4-door, but I believe it was 2-door.
No.
No, we didn't have the 63
that
Ford
was a
yet.
51. That was a 51.
51
Little green
Ford.
51
Yes,
Ford.
it was.
4-door. A little
And,
51 Ford. Mm-hmm.
Due to the fact that I could, I said something to Frida. I said, do you suppose I could get a job with Shires? And she said, go over on Sheridan Road and see if you can get a job. Well, I got hired right away. But I was only supposed to be temporary because the woman who had worked for Jerry was going to come back. Well, I worked for him for 3 months, and by that time I was pretty well broke in, and he was giving me plenty of work because I only wanted about 3 or 4 days a week. And so she didn't come back, so I got put on full-time between Prospect Dairy and Roger had, Jerry's brother was manager. I was just all over the place. I didn't have any, I worked certain days for Jerry Waldschmidt, but I worked one day for Frida, and I started working for Roger, East Peoria, Creve Coeur, and also Western. And one of the women that Frida had working for her, her name was Lenora Moyer, and she got cancer and she had to have some treatments. And at that time, the Shires had just built a new dairy out to Lake of the Woods. And she was to start the dairy and she wasn't able. So I got sent out there, and that's when we had the new 68 Ford. And I drove it out there then. So when I came back from that dairy, she finally was able to take her job after 3 months. I asked Frida, she had been working for Frida, and I said, if you've got an opening for 40 hours, put me on. I'm tired of being sent all over the place. And so that's when I was put on the regular 40-hour work week. Then they left me alone. And I walked to work. We let you boys use the car. I walked to work, and then Dad would come up after me at night, 10 o'clock.
And you worked, it was about, what, 3 blocks away, wasn't it?
That's
It was
all.
about 3.
Yeah.
I worked there for 14 years. You and Don both had high school jobs there. And then Donnie was put out to Lake of the Woods, and he really needed the car then, so I was glad I could give it to him. He worked out there about every weekend, and I put you on in our store after I became manager. So it was interesting.
What kind of things do you guys think of when you think of raising us kids, us 4 kids in the house at 1007? What kind of fond memories do you have of the family there through the years? You lived there for 25 years, and I know I was there for 18 of those years.
I guess one of the things was we had a very nice neighborhood.
So it was,
We had a lot of good neighbors that we could visit with. Like we said, we had an annual picnic with them. We had friends as well as just as neighbors. You children grew up with and made friends of quite a few of the neighbor children, and I guess that'd be one of the things that sticks in my mind. We didn't move a lot, so all you children went to the same grade school and the same high school, and that way, and we had a PTA that we went over and attended. That's another way we got acquainted with the neighbors. And all of you kids were in band, both in grade school and high school. We got to go to some of those events. In fact, Catherine was one that got to take several trips.
3. She got to go on 3 band
in the
trips.
summertime, but going into the summer band, like most of you boys kept busy, like on paper routes and Cub Scouts and things like that.
Well, they were in summer band,
And,
both of them, Dad.
But she got to go one trip to Montreal, and then another one out to the World's Fair in New York.
1964, I believe.
Yeah. So those were some of the things that I
Well,
can remember that was outstanding.
One of the things I liked about the neighborhood before we bought the house, we lived just 3 blocks away from it on Fry, was the fact that it was located near the grade school, near the high school, near Glen Oak Park, and close to our doctor. At that time, later, when we first had you children, we had Dr. Campbell, but then later we had Dr. Lawless. And we could walk about any place. You could go over to the store, as you got older, we taught you how to cross the big busy streets, and you always had Big Sister with you. She and Becky were friends, and you all had playmates about your age, every one of you.
Oh yeah, we had the Mathis family, who's oldest
You had little
boy.
Mark at that time. He was
Mark
a nice
Waking.
little guy, and Donnie played with the Erickson boys. I don't know that you did as much, but Don
They
did.
weren't my age, but of course he dated one of the Erickson girls for a while
Yeah,
in
I
high
did.
school.
But you run around quite a bit with Steve, and Steve was a very nice boy, very nice fellow. So you had a lot of friends there. And that's half of raising children. If you got something to do with someone, of course you had Don too, but you always had neighbor kids for games, for bicycling, for tricycles, for anything you want to do. And as Dad mentioned, everybody got along well.
Some of the things that I liked about growing up in our family was that we always ate together. We ate our meals together
yeah.
for the most part. I
The
mean,
evening meal we ate together. That's
and
right.
then there was a Sunday afternoon meal after church. We all sat down and usually had a roast beef and baked potatoes and
You did.
carrots, and there was a certain amount of consistency always in the way we lived.
Mhm.
We lived in a way that was always predictable and gave it a stability as far as a place to grow up.
Well, one of the things that your dad requested when we were married is his mother would drag out this Sunday meal till 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was just her way, her habit, and she'd give him a good meal and all. So we had the meals on time. The roast beef was because we'd go to church and Sunday school, and I'd stick it in the oven and let it cook.
Mm-hmm.
That was done then when I came home from church.
Mm-hmm. Are there any funny things that stand out that some of us kids did? I know either Don or I took some Lux liquid soap across the rug in
It was you.
living room. What can you can you tell about that incident?
Oh yeah, we had a sink with a cabinet in it in the kitchen, and I kept the wax and so forth in the kitchen down underneath of it, and just like you're watching little Jim right now, if you don't watch him, he's gonna do some of this too. And we had just we had a new carpeting in the living room and matched throw rugs, and I had just scrubbed and waxed the kitchen. I was waiting for David to come home, and I was going to give all of you lunch, and you were about 2, and you went in there and shook the whole can of wax all over my living room, just right straight through the whole length and all. And we tried to clean it, and we finally picked it up and took it to the cleaners, and they never did a good job of it, but we've often laughed about it because when David come home to eat, I was still skating in wax trying to give him his lunch. And it was kind of an unusual thing. And then one of the things David done is he threw our alarm clock in the Warriors into the toilet bowl.
Oops.
And you couldn't get another one much in those days, and that Dad depended on to go to work with.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wind-up clock. We didn't trust the electricity in those days
Mm-hmm.
because we used to have ice storms, and the wires were through the trees, and it would knock our electricity out. So Mrs. Shuck, the mother of Zelda, finally found us a new wind-up alarm clock in Washington. And we got that then and paid her for it and was glad to get it. But he also had a habit of, just going back to him for a few minutes, of rocking his crib. And we had hardwood floors in the rented house. Well, we did in our home we bought too. And he kept motioning that thing back and forth across the floor and had wheels on it, and he got the thing over to his powder can that I used to change him with, and dumped it all over the floor. He even had it in his hair. So your dad took the coasters out from underneath the crib, and that ended that. He couldn't move it anymore. Some of the fun times we had, David was your chief entertainer before he went to college, is he had two boys in the neighborhood and himself. One of them was Rusty. If you remember Rusty and his brother, they lived on the other side of the Demen boy, the next door. And he had 3 electric trains with all their tracks hooked up through the living room, dining room, kitchen, and the hallway. And 11 of you neighbor children were in there playing with him.
I gotta change the battery here.
They had a regular network.
Oh, they did. Tell you. Another thing I'll mention, that David was going to college at Wabash. I think probably it was between his freshman and sophomore year, at home at Christmas time, and we'd had a big snow. And he loved to get out and mess around, and you all got out there with him. We had all the neighbor kids, I don't know how many. I know it was Becky and the Erickson kids, and by that time I think Steve Mathis had moved out of the neighborhood. Maybe not. No, I guess he hadn't yet.
No, oh no.
And you all helped him roll, and you rolled the snowballs as big as you could get them, for the snowman. And he was big enough and tall enough, he lifted them on top, and you had one of the biggest snowmen in the neighborhood. And we've got pictures of it.
Yeah, he took a machete to carve that.
Yeah, he did.
Put a
And
straw hat on the top.
it was a neighborhood thing, and Some of the school kids were jealous as you were going to school after the holiday was over, and I think it stood for 2 or 3 weeks, and finally one of the boys pushed it over.
We got
But-
really good of it.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of anything more?
Oh yeah. As you got older, well, first you learned to ice skate on the lagoon at Glen Oak. I think you did on that.
Oh yeah.
Then you learned to swim down over the hill at the Glen Oak pool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how much you learned, but most of them did. You took lessons down there every summer. And then one other time, David was, we had an ice storm, and it didn't bother him in the least. He put his ice skates on, and we're not ice skating all over the place. And Ed
On
Cook
the
was,
roads, you mean?
yes, on the roads. And Ed
On the
Cook was
roads.
making a comment about it. He said, well, he's one person enjoying it, he said. But we also used and I don't know if we did so much for you, Larry, yeah, I think we did. For your New Year's Eve parties, we let you use the fireplace, and you always had hot dogs and marshmallows and cocoa and.
Oh yeah. And I know we used to stay overnight in the trailer as well. So
Oh
in
yeah.
high school.
Oh yeah.
But not too much in the winter time.
No, I'm afraid not. It was a little cold out there.
Dave kind of rebuilt the whole backyard there for one summer while he was putting a sailboat together.
That's
He
right.
sure did, and he entertained all of you.
I think that was the year he was a senior in high school.
It was between his senior and he started.
And I
college
had
that
bought a popular science
Set of
mechanics
books. You still got it.
encyclopedia. There was kind of home craft and everything, and there was a picture of a sailboat in there, and he says, I'm going to build a sailboat. I thought, oh, no, you're not. And it was kind of like a surfing board, and he expanded a little bit larger and got some plywood together and started sawing the pieces, and he covered with epoxy, and he cut out a sail, and Alice Pullen, that was Gerald's wife at the time, sewed it together, and he was dating Susie's wife now, and they went out sailing on that. I don't know whether she went when the maiden voyage or
Here
not.
we come.
And he had to make some changes on it, but still he had a lot of fun with that little sailboat. It would scoot along pretty good. In fact, he had to build a stronger mast on it. The first mast he had was just large dowling, and he went out there in a pretty good wind that busted the mast, so he had to improvise and make a little different, a little stronger mast. But he had a lot of fun with that sailboat that whole summer. In fact, I think he had about 2 summers, and then he sold that. Oh, after he went in service. He sold before he went in service. Then he still has sailboats. Still likes to sail with a boat. So it's been a lifetime hobby.
Well, one
with
of
him.
the experiences I had over that is, if you remember, we had a big living room, 19 by, I think it was 9 or 12. He hauled the big Davenport. It was the year, he wasn't dating Susie, Dad. That was the year he went with the blonde girl from
Okay, all
high
right.
school. But anyway, because he didn't know Susie until his sophomore year, and he knew her, but he wasn't dating her. He hauled my big Davenport out of the living room and laid all this butcher paper down, which is butcher in those days was
Brown paper.
wrapping paper on rolls, and drew the pattern, which is something to really drew it big enough that he could lay the material out on, and then he cut out the sails for Aunt Alice. So it was quite a project, I'll tell you. It was a lot of fun. He put it up on top of our car to haul it back and forth with Dad's ladder haulers, because
Car
we didn't
carrier.
have a truck then.
Car
And
carrier.
he come back one day, and he and Susie had the water hose out, and they were cleaning the sand off of the sailboat, and then they turned it on each other. This was the following year. He always stayed up in the top of the garage while he was gone.
I remember that.
And Dad got out there acting a fool with him, and he shut the water off. You remember that? Turned the water off at the house there, and Susie and Dave turned around. Dave slipped over and turned it back on, and they turned the water hose on Dad, fully dressed.
We all
And
had-
of
we all
all
had a
the
shower.
laughing and squealing that was going on, I think the whole neighborhood was watching. So it was a lot of fun.
I see
And,
something up there, Daddy.
And I know this is going to get quite a bit later, but I remember Dad did some improvements on the house over at 1007. You painted it a couple times, and you put in a new driveway. in I believe 1970, you put in a driveway. You and Harold Markham.
I think you did, but I don't remember the year for
next
sure.
door neighbor. I've got pictures of it that say 1970 on them, so it would have been before.
Was 70 or 71.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, not got his name. A neighbor next door.
Markham.
Markham. Yeah.
Harold Markham.
Harold Markham.
Yeah.
All we had for driveway was it had been sidewalks on both sides. There were strips of concrete probably about foot and a half wide. We had to drive out back and forth of that, and I decided we needed a little bit better driveway. So talked to Harold, and we took all that concrete out, all our sidewalk and all the concrete in the backyard. And he had a 3/4 ton truck. We hauled all that junk pieces of concrete out to Bill and Frida Brooks out to Germantown, and Ed Cook loaned us a concrete mixture. When we put most of the concrete in the evenings and weekend, and we spent a little time doing it.
How long did it take you to get the driveway in?
Wow.
We spent probably a total of 6 weeks by the time we had it all dug out and put it in a section at a time.
One thing that I got tickled about on that was that Ed Cook come out, said they were doing a lousy job. He was telling Dad, he said, "That's terrible." We had borrowed his concrete mixer. They were using that would wound. I guess it was electric, and he was trying to boss Dad about it. And Dad says, "Well, you know something, Ed?" He said, "Harold and I are perfectly satisfied. Don't worry about it." And I don't know what else he said. And Irene come over a couple of days later and says, "Your husband's terrible."
I would cut that out. Not put that in there. Well, what we did, I wanted it sloped so that the water that fell on the driveway and off of the roof would flow out to the street. So I had it elevated. We used it with a plumb line. So I wanted drainage so the water would drain all the way from our garage here to the street and wouldn't be flooding the yard or our basements. And he didn't agree with the way I did it, was all.
You know what? The driveway's
I
still
don't know how
on.
you'd have done it without doing it that way, unless you
So's
did
Harold.
a sump pump and a well.
Yeah. Let's see. The next question is what part does church play in your life?
I think it plays a more important part as years go by. We're not as active as many committees and clubs, but it still plays a very important part in our lives.
What all have you done in the church?
Oh golly.
Well, Helen is still singing in the choir. We're still on the missions committee, and we go to Sunday school. They call it Acorn class, and still have a meeting with the Acorn, what we have left, once a month that goes around to different homes. Mainly it's about 2 or 3 different homes now. Mm-hmm. And Helen's also active in the Women's Society, and I have joined the Methodist Men's Club.
Mm-hmm. How long have you guys attended this church?
I've gone to our church ever since I left the Brimfield Church before I married Dad.
1940.
I just transferred from the Union Church to
1940.
So that was Old Hale.
that was Old Hale. I might tell you how I got started. Kenny and I were going to Brown's Business College, and we had a teacher down there by the name of Mr. Held, and he had a college group up at the Old Hale Church, and he wanted us to come up there. And so we went and got acquainted with the pitches and everybody up there, and we had a college class of about 25 young people. So I started, and I have stayed. Kenny started, and he stayed for a while till he married Zelda. And they were members of the church for quite a while. But he was married by a Methodist church minister out in Yates City at that time. Mm-hmm. So the church has been pretty important to us all of our life. Dad is not, he's not saying all the offices and stuff he's held, but he's called on shut-ins. He's helped with Christmas baskets through the years. Used to deliver them down the south end to the poor people. I've gone with him. He's gone with other men. He's called on a lot of people in neighborhoods trying to get them to come to church. Those are non-church people. Whenever we'd have a drive, he was always worked in a shop. He was tired at night, he didn't get into as much of it as I did, but we've had, I don't know, I think you were on administrative board a good many times, and I think they tried to get him on to being a trustee. But at the time they wanted him to be a trustee, that's when we were building the new church, they wanted the trustees' names on the bank loan, and Dad didn't feel, since he had a family of 4 kids, that he wanted his name attached to something like that when he was already in debt on other stuff. So we didn't follow through on that. But the church has meant a lot to us. We helped build the new church, Larry. Very much did. Still are, still quite interested in it. I have been a member since 1956, or since 1940. So I've got 58 years in next February, March. And I don't know when Dad joined. He went to church there before that. When did you join? Do you remember?
Reverend
Minzie was the
Reverend
minister?
Minzie was still there. It was probably
Early 40s, I think, anyway.
It was several years later.
And the last question that I have, and this doesn't cover everything, but this is just what I had written out. What things would you like James to know to live a good life? You can give him to Mom there. What would you recommend James to do? And things that have worked for you guys, made your life a good life.
Well, I think the things that a child learns in his home from his parents probably are things that will stick with him all through his adult life. The values that you have, maybe you'll think that he doesn't understand, or doesn't think of the importance of them, and you'll kind of wonder if it's taken any hold with him or any. But you will find as years go by, those values will mean something to them. And of course, I know that you're going to show him one thing that is very important, is the love that you have for him, and the guidance and the teaching that you give him will stand him in good stead all through his life.
Well, one of the things I've always found is very important, Larry, is the early years, the mother has the training of the child, and teaching them to be honest is probably one of the main things that I worked with Don on. Not that he was stealing, but when he was about 3, he got into some candy up in the neighborhood store, and I found it in his pocket when I got him home. I guess it was bubble gum. And the store had closed. So the next day, in the morning, I took him up there with a baby, with you and a stroller and him, and I had him pay for the gum, give the gum back to the storekeeper, and had him apologize. And he stood on first one foot and then the other, and finally he started crying. And you know, he never forgot it. So it's just the way we teach them. And the storekeeper said to me at that time, he said, if everybody was as honest with their children, he says, as you're teaching yours, I would have a lot of my problems solved in the store.
Well, another thing is taking interest in what the children are doing, not only at home but in school and with their playmates. Know who they're playing with and teaching the
That's
values
very
that they
important.
need all of their life, I think, are the important things.
Kathy had one pretty little girl in her Glen Oak grade school class, and I was sorry to say the mother wasn't too much. She was mentally retarded for one thing, and she used to take the geese, you might remember some of this, they used to carry the geese that the children would get at in the Easter time and carry them over to the lagoon and put them in the lagoon over there and let them swim, and the rest of the time they spent their time in her kitchen. And I finally had to break up. I told Catherine, I said, you can play with her on the schoolhouse, but I'm not going to allow you to go down to her home, because she was just the wrong environment for Kathy to be around. So it is important that you know who they chum with. And I say chum, I'm not speaking who they play with, but chum with. It's very important on that. That'll be Hope's job. She'll probably keep track of it.
I have no qualms about the two of you
No, I don't either.
not being good parents to those little ones.
Well,
You're a lucky guy, and And you're lucky to, and very fortunate to have a little boy like you've got here.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very proud of all those three of you.
We feel very fortunate.
Yes, indeed.
I'd like to ask you a question. You've been asking me. How do you feel about the way you were raised?
I feel very fortunate about the way I was raised and have wanted to emulate the same type of home that I had with James here and with Hope. And I'm very thankful for the things that I had growing up and the type of home I was raised in. We didn't maybe have every little thing, but I never knew it. I never knew we
You
didn't.
don't know you don't have everything. You're better off if you don't, Larry.
Yeah.
These people that are raised with lots of money are not happy.
Well, there's no such thing
Happiness is not bought.
as perfect parent, but I say in spite of all we did, you turned out real good. Yeah, we're not. There's nobody makes does everything right. That's for sure. We tried.
Well, we made mistakes. I'm not going to say we didn't raise kids. Everybody does. But
Come over and see Daddy, Grandpa. You want to see Grandpa? Okay. Come over and see Grandpa.
He knew you were down here. He wasn't happy upstairs.
No,
He kept
of
going,
course not.
Grandpa, Grandpa.
Yep. You want to come down and see what's going on, didn't you?
I will
Come
say
down and
one
see what's
thing.
going
We
on.
had wonderful families of relatives to raise all of you with.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And we were called a clannish family, but we didn't much care. We still are clannish.
Want to get down now? Okay.
We spent
Watch
lots
the
and lots of our
microphone here.
holidays with each other and had a good time doing it. So.
Oh, yes. Well, I know I relish the family get-togethers around Christmas time. We used to have as many as 30 people in our
Oh, yeah,
home,
easily.
and those were wonderful times.
It's
James,
a
would you
microphone.
Well-
like to say something in the microphone?
mic-
With the
Microphone.
farm background of both of our parents
Hi, Daddy.
and all of us
Can you say
raised
hi,
on the
Daddy?
farms, we had a lot in common there. That was a very good. Everybody knew how to work. They knew how to make a dollar stretch, and you learned that from different
Yeah,
stuff.
tractor. It's
So,
a tractor.
We included Aunt Mildred and Uncle
And
Paul
a
in the
truck.
family get-togethers,
And a
and
truck.
also Kenny and Zelda. But it started out with 4 of us being already married to each other.
It's a pretty sturdy toy. Isn't
That
it?
made a pretty good foundation there. Brrr.
Well, thank you very much for the interview and the good memories. So we'll.
So is there any other advice you want to pass on to us?
no.
No?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think you need much
I
advice.
think you're doing good.
You grow,
Very good.
everybody makes mistakes and they grow from it and they learn from it. And I don't think that I can't say that I knew everything because I didn't.
Still
You
don't.
learn as time goes along.
Would you like to show us a little bit of that just on TV a little bit?
Sure can.
Oops, Dad.
Let's not have him play with those.
These are worth about $400 a piece.
We won't worry about that. Just don't want